episode, or in the past year and a half, what was the weekly rundown for the Trails Collective, coming at you here for April 19th, 2022. As always, pretty excited to bring you some voices from the collective or the region, as well as dig into a feature guest on the evening as well. For those who are tuning in, feel free and by all means drop any questions or comments into the dialogue box or the comment boxes. This is streaming live on my own personal Facebook page, as well as the Trails Collective's Facebook and YouTube channels. It will be available to replay after the effect, or after the fact rather. So for any of you who are tuning in down the road or down the line, thank you so much, and feel free to drop some comments in there as well. And it will also be available in podcast form wherever you find your podcasts down the line. And for those who are continuing to support us, thank you so much. Thank you for liking our channel. Thank you for sharing the posts. Thank you for weighing in with updates. Thank you. For all those who have taken that additional step of becoming a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for just showing a bit of support for what we're trying to do here. I've really done what I can over the past couple of years, or we as a collective, to really bring the focus on Northeast trail running community together, getting awareness out for maybe some smaller events, bringing you voices from the larger collective, really bringing us together into a more collective trail running whole, and really celebrating what really aligns all of us. So thank you for the support. So in this evening's episode, I am going to weave in a couple guests from results from this past weekend. We will start with Mort Nace for the opening 15 minutes or so, and then we will move into chatting with Sarah Port's Connor. And then somewhere around 8 o'clock, as long as the tech works, we'll also weave in Jay Dicharry, who is literally one of the preeminent sports physical therapists in the world. Somebody who I have admired and listened to over the years, and who I am really excited to connect with here a bit this evening. So to get into that a bit, Mort.
Hey, Ian.
Thanks again, buddy. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
All right. So Mort Nace is the manager at MedVed Running and Walking in Rochester, New York, and one of the head geese at Goose Adventure Racing. This past weekend, Goose put on the 16th running of the Muddy Sneaker Trail Run 20K in Naples, New York. Muddy Sneaker was one, although I have not yet competed or entered, which I don't know why I haven't, so my apologies. Although it's tough to get in, it sells out, I know, fairly quickly. It has been a staple, and it was one that was pretty immediately on my radar when I moved back east in 2006, which I think was your first running. Does that sound about right?
If there's any indication of how low tech we are, there are only results up from 2006 on Ultra Sign Up. The race actually started in 2000. So this year was our 22nd running.
Got it. Okay.
We had a fall version of it last year. We didn't have a race in 2020.
Awesome. Okay. So we'll see if we can take some tangents here as well and dig into your various hats here a little bit. But I've got just a few questions to take us into some of those tangents. So legend has it that the origin of your race company had to do with back alley racing of geese in the streets of Rochester, New York. True or false? And if false, what's with the name?
That is false. The name was a compilation of Tim Ratowski and I get out, outdoor sports and experiences. So I put that together. We got Goose, and then it became, I think Roads or Poison actually existed before Goose existed.
Okay.
We settled on Roads or Poison as a mantra early on, and then Goose just came together, and Ratowski added on adventure racing. We don't direct adventure races, but we like to think all that we do has a sense of adventure about it. And we do compete as adventure racers, but it has more to do with the kind of racing we put on.
And do you feel like it's easier to sell Goose Adventure Racing because nobody quite gets it, but it's kind of fun to think about, yet the the road lobby is pretty strong. So when you say roads are poison, I mean, you're probably going to anger a lot of people there.
Yeah, we're used to it. You know, we like to laugh at ourselves because who doesn't run roads? You know, roads are just too convenient, and us included. But it does I think say a lot about the kinds of races we like to put on.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into that. So Muddy Sneaker is definitely one that again I've been aware of from the get-go, and we'll dig into that here in just a second. Lay out the Goose Adventure Racing land, though. What else do you guys put on?
Well, currently on hold is our Ontario Summit Trail races. Looks like we're going to take another year off from that as we seek permission in some of our trails, and we just feel like we're a little late in the game. We are not professional event directors, so there are 5 of us who make these things happen. And Ontario Summit, we just didn't get it together. We're working on Damn Good down in Letchworth.
Okay.
One of our August events, 14 miler. That I think there's a good chance of that happening. And then we have our winter races. Frozen Assets is, I think, the star there. Our 5K snowshoe race down at Harriet Hollister. We have a 6-hour snowshoe event called Cast a Shadow. We also have put on races in Mendon Ponds Park, part of a winter fest.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cummings Nature Center, 10K Nordic Fest.
Okay, cool. All right, so good broad line up there, and hopefully Ontario's back in the mix. I've heard good things about that as well, and it is a pretty beautiful area.
Yeah.
But the focus of the week, tell us a little bit about Muddy Sneaker. I guess the roots, a little bit about the course, and how that shook out.
Sneaker was an idea of both Tim and I. We talked about it for a while. You know, we were both traveling around doing trying trail races that intrigued one or the other, and we challenged the other one to tag along. Pikes Peak was something we did together, and we just felt like our area at the time lacked a race that reflected the kind of racing we like to do. And we had hiked a little bit down in High Tour, but Tim investigated a little further the trail systems that are around Conklin's Gully, where we were often hiking. And we finally decided early on in January 2000, actually, that we needed to do this that year. So in 4 months, 2 guys that had never put on a race, were pretty clueless as to how to go about doing it. We pulled it together. We had 67 that first year that showed up to give it a shot. And we think it reflects us really well. There's a lot of single track. There's a lot of elevation change in 12 miles. And the following year we sold out. We had a limit of 100, I believe, this year 2. Runners World gave us a little call out after just 2 years. And then we continue to sell out. Here we are 22 years later. We've got 5 runners that have done all of them. This year we had a number of people who raced the first year and came back. 3 of them got called up for awards, so they're still running pretty quickly. And we feel very fortunate that we have this following. I think it benefits us that we're in April. There is less going on in April than other months. I suspect you haven't run with us because of Breakneck, but I'd like to get down and do that one myself. But you've got a pretty full calendar around the Sneaker. But for the most part, I think there's less going on. There's that little race in Boston that seems to be on our weekend. But
but who cares about that one? Back to the roads or poison thing. And so with your course, there's a little bit of everything there, and it has a signature climb, I believe I've heard there at the end, maybe a little bit of an ascending finish.
Yeah. Tim named that the Demoralizer a while ago. When he introduced me to the course, what he had in mind, we did it backwards. We just did in reverse, and I just thought it was ridiculous as we're hiking down, and it just continued down and it got steeper. And he shows me 2 miles of uphill that is pretty unfriendly at times. And people have embraced it. To hear the stories of people getting down to the bottom of the gully and completely different. There's a lot of racing left, and how their day changed, sometimes for the better. But a lot of people left their legs at the bottom of the gully with not much to climb with. So yeah, we're kind of known for that. The course itself, about half single track, half access road through the area. I think it's pretty entertaining, and it can be fast at times. And then there are other times where like, wow, the descents are real. And yeah, that those last 2 miles are something.
Yeah. All right. And so question 2, and it's kind of melding into conversation here too as well, but legend has that you created an event which tries to suck the sneakers off of entrants so as to create more shoe sales for MedVed. True or false? And if false, what are the roots and deal with muddy sneaker? Like, I mean, are you just guaranteed to lose a shoe there or what?
It's happened. I had one of my last customers today was a guy who blew out his shoes at Sneaker. I suppose there's a benefit. Maybe I love seeing familiar faces from the race that come into the shop, whether they buy shoes or not because they lost a pair. Maybe there's some benefit there, but no, just a fitting name that we guarantee, no matter how dry a year might be, that we guarantee your feet are going to get wet. We do have a creek crossing, and it's hysterical to see what some runners will do to get from getting wet in there, because the next mile after that creek crossing, there's so much standing water. It's like, come on. I mean, I saw a guy this year, a guy who's run with us before, go 20 to 30 meters in the other direction to what he thought was the best creek cross. All right.
Well, that could be a whole separate episode on just the evolutionary mental mechanisms of us as individuals, but just trail runners, right? I mean, like in terms of just how the brain works there, what we do to a certain extent. And Sarah, who we'll bring on next, I mean, she's probably tougher than both of us, and I'm assuming she runs right through the mud yes, because she's tougher than us. But for most of us, we'll try to kind of, like you said, maybe tiptoe around for a little while, maybe do what we can to foster more erosion of our trails. And then at some point you give up, but there's something where it's like, you should avoid that. You should try not to get your feet wet or whatever. Yeah.
Shortest distance, right, is a straight line. Just go right through it. It's I promise you wet feet. So,
all right. Question number 3. You had a solid field this year with returning muddy sneaker legends, including Jeff Beck and Zach Rivers.
Yeah.
Yet the winner was 18 minutes off of Jeff's course record and 20 minutes for the lead female off the women's record.
Yeah.
True or false that in the years 2012 and earlier, you had entrants sniff cocaine ahead of the start, which had the effect of yielding wicked fast times? And if false, are we all just getting soft?
Oh, interesting theory. That is false. We had it speaks to how special Jeff and Jess were running back then. There is some speed. I have to call it Chad Malloy a couple of years, who, as far as I know, had never run our course before, and ran by himself and ran 2 minutes off of Jeff. Well, actually 1 minute off the course record. We changed the course one year. Jeff owns both course records, but Chad got within a minute of Jeff's record running by himself on a course he'd never seen before. So Chad's effort, I think it was 2 years ago, was pretty special. But there was depth in our region back then, or that we saw some fast times, some real depth. I mean, going back to the first year, I mean, we had a number of runners in the 120s and the 130s, and you don't see that as much anymore. Granted, this year conditions were slow. It was a homecoming. It was very, very cool to see Jeff race, Zach come back. We had, I think, 8 previous winners that were in attendance. So it was a real homecoming, and the number of runners who had run the first year that had come back. We still have the 5 runners who had done all of them, and so many other friends that just returned that we maybe hadn't seen in a little while. So, yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is, and I think speaks to the community of. I suppose it happens in road races as well, or in whatever, any endeavor. But it's awesome and no different in the trail world, where it really is a coming back together, probably all the more important through COVID or after COVID.
Yeah.
And also, even though it shifted over the years, now that we're also wired together and keeping up on what everybody's doing on via social media, but still awesome to be back in person together there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And what's your field size now? Do you still cap out at?
What we do, we've gone through letting 150 in and then having wait lists. I despise wait lists. We went to weighted lottery for a number of years, which also included a wait list. And what we do now, we have an agreed upon number with the DEC. After having conversations with them about showing them that we were managing our race, we weren't letting it get carried away, as well as actually caring about our impact in the trails. We think we could have 300 to 400 in there, but we wouldn't let it. What we do now is we let in 200, and through normal attrition, life happens, get down to around the 150 to 170 number naturally. So no wait list again, just let more than we have room for. Interesting thing this year was that we still had 199 on Friday that were entered into the race. And then 25% didn't show up that day. So I didn't expect that. I expected a really big field, and that was a big number for me, but it ended up putting us where in the end we want to be.
Wanted to be anyway.
Right. So
it's interesting that those numbers are fairly bankable. Then you add a little bit of crummy weather and it makes it all the more bankable. So, and so so for those who want to, if they haven't found their way to Muddy Sneaker yet, it's typically always in April. And when do you open registration?
We keep the race on the third Saturday of April. We typically open registration the first 2 weeks of February.
Okay.
It depends on life and making things happen. So I think we have opened it a little bit later than that some years, but we try to stay on top of our website and our social media to get the word out. But that is typically when it opens up. And It's sold out in 12 days this year, which is a little slower. We often see it in a day or two, but it does sell out. We're really thankful for that. We're pretty fortunate. But
awesome. Well, great job creating and then carrying on for so many years. One of the regionals, original and gem. So nice work, and glad it went well. And thanks for joining us to share a bit tonight on it.
Thanks for having me, Ian. Appreciate it.
All right, dude. Yeah, talk to you later.
Yeah.
All right. And then stoked next to bring into the stream Sarah Ports Connor.
Hi, Ian.
Sarah, it's wonderful to have you on here.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. So Sarah Ports Connor has been one of the most exceptional athletes on my radar for a couple of years now, sitting number 2 for women worldwide in FKTs. And based on my now ability to Facebook stalk her photos, since she approved my request, I also see that she's incredibly adept at positioning herself horizontally between objects in nature and in yoga poses that my brain is incapable of processing. She's a dog walker for added mileage and a barista for additional time on her feet, and living in Connecticut. And this past weekend, she returned to nail another win at Traprock for the 17K. Sarah, it's great to have you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Totally. All right. And so and a few questions here just to spur some discussion. So true or false? The technicality of Traprock is an example of why less technical Western Trail FKT routes should only count for half a point. And if false, can you tell us about Traprock anyway and how the race shook out for the win?
Well, I don't know about weighting FKT points, and I'm also not that big on I'm not racing to a certain number of them. I don't care that I have the second most. I think they're a lot of fun. So I just chase them pretty frequently. But having done a few routes that are on less technical terrain, there's a big difference. And I think it'd be interesting to see what some of the strong runners out west would think of our trails.
It would be interesting, right? And just because I've seen your name come up so much with FKTs, and I guess I don't know, it's interesting for sure during COVID, where in the absence of events, some people that may have done events proper otherwise maybe turn to FKTs. But you also get a sense of individuals. Now it sounds like for you, where you really, it's just a good, enjoyable motivation to maybe take you to places that you may not go otherwise and give you some motivation to be out there. But it's clear from some of your photos and what you're choosing that you really just kind of enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it's a blast. I started doing it just slightly prior to the pandemic. Coincidentally, I think I just was in the right place at the right time because all of a sudden it blew up. But yeah, I try to pick fun routes. And when I can, I like to like multitask. So if a route has the option of getting more than one FKT, I try to go for them, even if that potentially compromises the whole effort. Like ultimately to run like to say the first 14 miles of a 35-mile loop, for example, really hard isn't ideal, but it's fun.
But yeah, it sounds like exciting too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
once you're out there, you're either, it's either going to work or you're going to blow up spectacularly.
Yep.
But yeah. All right, we'll come back. I'll maybe bring you back to FKTs a little bit. Tell us a bit about Traprock. Connecticut's amazing. We just, for the Trails Collective, just started, Eric Egan released the first Trail Town, and there was a number of individuals in Connecticut who helped me assemble quite a bit. I was going to release Connecticut as the first state in talking about trail towns, and I still need to release that article. I just need to figure out how to put it out there, and I just haven't gotten there. But all that's to say, for those who don't know, Connecticut has an amazing amount of trails, and you're never, it seems like, far from a trail network, and it's a really seemingly in touch connection and community of individuals. So tell us a bit about, I guess, that community and what Traprock's all about.
Yeah, so Traprock's kind of the season opener. It's one of the bigger races in Connecticut that you find some strong runners coming from other areas in New England. I have only run it twice, so I don't have like the greatest perspective on the history of it. I haven't done the 50K, but it's fun. Everyone shows up, and it's like after a winter of sometimes we can't access our trails, so everyone's finally back out there, and it's like it's a party. I like it.
And what?
But yeah, there's trails
sorry,
everywhere here. I was just gonna say there's trails everywhere here. It's impressive. I don't think people think of that when they think of Connecticut, but there are trails everywhere, and they're mostly pretty rugged.
And are you living in kind of one of those trail towns, so to speak? I mean, do you have a lot around you?
It's again surprising. I live in New Haven, which you think of as just a city, but I have access to quite a few really rugged trails. Within a mile of my house, I can get to like 3 or 4 different trail networks. And I didn't think I would like living in New Haven. I'm really a country girl, but I've been loving it just because of the easy trail access. It's like I used to live in the middle of nowhere, and that's great and beautiful and all, but there actually aren't as many trails out where I used to live. There's dirt roads, but because there's just so few people, there weren't as many trails.
And Traprock as a course, pretty indicative or reflective of kind of East Coast terrain, or can you take us through the course a little bit, how it's designed or technicality or whatever?
So from my perspective, which is slightly skewed from the trails I gravitate towards, it isn't as technical as some of the trails that you can access around here, partly just because it's such a popular route, and the more foot traffic a route gets, the less technical it ends up being. All the little small rocks and twigs and stuff end up off the side, and the dirt gets packed down. But yeah, there's some healthy hikes, healthy hills in there, and very little flat terrain. The course was altered a couple of years ago because of COVID. There used to be some overlap it was kind of an out and back, and there used to be overlap with runners going in different directions, and they eliminated that. And I think that may have made the course a tiny bit easier because we used to descend some pretty technical descents that we climb now, but we don't go back down them. But yeah, I think most people would say it's a very technical trail with some really good climbs, and it is. There are some trails around here that are even more of both of those things.
And so do you have pretty much the same fire between FKTs and racing once that starts, and how the race shake out? It looks like you were just 2 minutes ahead of second. Was it a kind of a battle out there, or was
it wasn't?
Yeah.
FKTs came in handy because I was alone from mile 2 on. There were some guys ahead of me I could see for most of the race. Around mile 4.5. I caught up to one of them, but several miles later, he passed me again. And that's actually the only contact I had with any racers after mile 2,
Okay.
was just that one flip flop.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think maybe I could have gone a little faster if I had someone around to link with, but because I do FKTs so frequently, I'm used to just pushing myself on my own. So that is also kind of my comfort zone. I haven't had to battle it out in a race for a while. I'm not scared of it. It kind of makes me excited, but I am pretty comfortable with just pushing on my own.
Cool. And for Traprock, they've got 2 distances, 17K and a 50K. And is it pretty much just repeat the 17K circuit, or is it a whole
Exactly.
different? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a loop, and the 50Kers do it 3 times. I chose the 17K because there's a Connecticut Blue Blaze Trail Racing Series, and when there's an event on the series calendar that has more than one distance, they select one. So in this instance, it was the 17K. So the 50K actually wouldn't earn you any points towards that series. So
Okay.
I went with the shorter one.
Got it. And then how's it? What's left? So this was, I imagine, an early one then in the series for the season. What else is?
This is the first one.
And what else is in the series? What do you got?
There's a soapstone race next month. I know there's a Goodwin Trail, I think, as the third after that. There's what else is there? There are quite a few. There's the last one is the Bimbler's Bluff, or just the Bluff. And I think there's like 11 total. There's one weekend that has 2 on them, but the rest of them are all on separate weekends. And I'm going to do as many of them as I can.
Which is pretty cool. And also speaking, and then back to just how extensive the Connecticut trail running community and world is, just to have 11 in the series there. And
so many strong runners. Like you mentioned FKTs, and I know you've spoken with Debbie, and I expect if you hadn't talked to her so recently, you would have had her on because she won the 50K there. Yeah. And she also has a ton of FKTs, and I don't check it that frequently, but I know she's in the top 5. At one point, she was number 3 for number of FKTs. And just the fact that you can have 2 women in the top 3 from the same state. We have a ton of FKTs, yes, but we're also we're competing with each other for them. So that makes some of them get pretty fast. Debbie and I have swapped quite a few times.
And I've also seen both of you go out with also friends and kind of picking some of these off as well. Debbie and Scott will go out for some, but then I've also seen her with some other friends. And it seems like on several of yours, you're also out there with friends as well, picking those off.
Yep. Ellen Beth she won the 17K last year. I hadn't met her until then. So we've become friends, and we've done some, we did one really epic FKT adventure together last summer. I've done a couple with my husband, which is more for me than it is for him. He's not as into competing, but I sometimes cajole him into going with me.
So is he dragging you down though, or your FKTs have been probably a little quicker? If you could have cut that cord right there.
I am faster than him, so there's a lot of there aren't that many routes I can do with him and still get the FKT anymore. But once in a while we do one.
Well, way to be taking one for the team there, and for that. Hopefully it's healthy for the marriage.
Oh yeah. I mean, if I were dragging him along or making him feel slow, then it definitely wouldn't be. But I like doing things with him, so I don't mind if it means I have to go a little slower.
And what are some that are on your radar? Any that are out there that, and maybe you're like, I don't necessarily know, or I'm not going to tell you, but are there any that you're
that's fine.
I would love to go do this route?
I have a list on my fridge with at least 20, and a couple of them have check marks because I've done them, but I'd be interested in doing the Connecticut Appalachian Trail miles. There's 52 of them, and there's a route that is all of those. I like to redo some of the same routes sometimes, just because I get stronger on them and I get faster on them, and I can see the progress I've made. So I would like to redo some of the ones that I feel like I didn't get my full potential on, or just I'm stronger on that type of terrain than I used to be. I definitely have gotten stronger on hills, uphills. I've always been strong on the downhills, but I've gotten stronger on the uphills in the last year. So the Quinnipiac Trail is a pretty well-known one in our little circle of the world, and it's tough, and I love it. And Debbie and I have both taken a crack at it before. So I'd like to try to redo that one, but they keep rerouting the trail. So I'm kind of been waiting on it to see what's the final iteration of it, but we'll see. Yeah, quite a few. And I also like the idea of like when I go on vacation, I try to find one in the area that is accessible to me,
Hmm.
that I'm fast enough to do, which is hard when you go somewhere like Colorado.
Yeah.
um, but because I'm not used to elevation, especially. Um, but yeah, so it's a combination of new ones, adventure ones, and redoing some of my favorites.
And then how about there are some local ones. I guess you still classify them as regional, but I can't remember if you've taken a crack at some of the kind of like the PEMIs or the Great Ranges
I
or kind of
haven't.
stuff like that.
Yes, partly it's logistics. I Now I'm making some fast female friends, which is fantastic because it isn't as easy to do all of that by yourself. So I
Hmm.
have friends now. We could both do them, or we could support one another, take turns supporting one another in ventures like that. I've done the PEMI. I actually haven't done a Prezi yet. It's on the list, but I haven't raced it or tried to go fast on it yet. I think it's probably similar to there's the Connecticut Appalachian Trail and Mohawk Trail Loop, which is about 35 miles with about 8,000 feet of vert. So it's not a PEMI, but it's like approaching that kind of concept. Um, I think it would be up my alley. But once you start getting to those like premier routes, then it gets pretty competitive.
It does. I mean, there's some fast times, and it
Yeah,
was.
there are.
I don't know whether it was just speaking to the. It's been in terms of the participation for a number of reasons, and we'll hopefully get into in May. We'll dig into maybe some women in trail running and some of the things that could be more balanced there. But at the moment, for a number of reasons, it started as kind of a more there's just a lot more routes that have history with males racing them. And some of those fast ones are just more recently being, I think, hammered out by some fast females.
Yeah.
So hopefully that continues to progress. But you're right. I mean, some of those out of the gates are some fast times.
Yeah. I would be
Um,
happy, like, if I take a crack at the Prezi, if I just get a time that, like, at one point would have been the FKT, I'll be happy. I think you have to take more than one hard crack at it probably to have a chance of actually getting the FKT.
and so for those, then the ones that you're doing, speaking of that technique, because you've done so many at this point, are you somewhat kind of red pointing, or are you going out and just doing it without prior scoping or sighting, or are
It
you?
depends.
Uh-huh.
If it's a super, super short route, sometimes there are some of those, then I'll, like 5 miles or under, I might just go jog the route, walk the route, and then immediately afterwards take a crack at it,
Yep.
like in high school cross country when you walk the course.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't really scope out the longer ones typically, or if I do, it'll be like sometimes I've done an FKT with my husband or just done it, but like at 90% and then come back and done it again at 100%. It helps so much to be familiar with the terrain.
Yep.
And that's part of the difficulty of some of those northern routes is they're 4 hours for me one way.
Yep.
Yeah, so then I have to decide, am I doing it all in one very, very long day? Am I doing all the driving myself? Am I going to be supported or not? Am I going to sleep up there? The logistics get a little bit more complicated.
All right. So last question here. True or false, Traprock was an excellent build-up event to gauge your fitness in order to join us for the Breakneck Point Full on April 30th.
False. I mean, I'm
Gosh.
sure it conceivably could be, but I already have 11 races on my calendar in the
Right.
next like 5 months. So I'm trying not to add too many more,
It's understandable.
but
All right.
I
Well, great
wish I
job
could.
this weekend. Great job on the continued nailing of so many FKTs and efforts and just having that spirit. And again, and just looking through, I was really looking for just photos to use for the profile card, but it's fun to see so many years. You really have fun out there.
I do.
Yeah. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
So thank you for taking some of your time out tonight, and
My
look
pleasure.
forward to touching base further and connecting more.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. So bringing into the stream next, somebody who I have been stoked to connect with here for some time, Jay Dicharry. So, Jay, man, it's good to see you.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Last time I saw you, I was waiting to connect with Molly Huddle in a booth at TRE, and you were in there getting down. I think she had just tweaked something, and I think you were taking her through a few things. And I was like, as much as I want to talk to Molly right now, she's actually working with Jay, and I'm going to go away for a while because he's actually incredible, and that's probably worth it right there.
Always working.
Yeah, always working. All right. So for those who don't know Jay, Jay is one of the preeminent sports physical therapists in the world, based in Oregon. He grew up a competitive swimmer where no doubt running was more punishment than focal enjoyment. He worked at the University of Virginia Speed Clinic from 2005 to 2012, diving into running mechanics with the use of the first instrumented treadmill in the U.S. In that time, he wrote and in 2012 released the book Anatomy for Runners. From 2012 to 2020, he was integral to the Rep Biomechanics Lab with Rebound Physical Therapy in Bend, Oregon, a world-class testing facility conducting research engaged in therapy and training. In that window, he wrote and in 2017 released Running Rewired here. And I would have held up Anatomy for Runners, but somebody took it out from in our store right now, and somebody checked it out from the store and it didn't come back. Clearly, they're still enjoying it. And released that in 2017. In 2019, he launched Mobility, or Mobo Board, which is here and which we will get into a bit, and currently pairs that work with direct client care, training, and consultation to footwear companies, and serves as associate faculty at Oregon State. So that's quite a bit. Not to mention you've got some kids, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. Yeah,
it is a lot of stuff. And you have people like me, you've got these world-class clients coming to you from shoe companies. And I appreciate that you're still taking the time out to do as many podcasts and such that you do, and to connect with us here for Trails Collective Live.
Oh, it's all right, man. I love helping everybody. It's all good. All good.
Right on. All right. So I have a handful or so of questions laid out that spanned a bit of that. And we'll use as maybe some springboards for some conversation. I'll try not to repeat too much some of the things that maybe you've done in some of your other podcasts, and hopefully make it more interesting. With that said, I realize that to be effective in really, for instance, talking about the Mobo Board, that it's helpful to have the same conversations and just really get that out there with new audiences. Okay. So we can go into still some of that, even though you've been, dude, like I just told like 3 podcasts about that. Here's the links. Just go listen to that. But all right. So question number 1, and for those listening again, thank you for tuning in live. This will also be available in podcast form after the fact. But if you are listening live and you have a question or comment for Jay or on the topic, feel free to drop it in the comment thread, and I will weave it in if where I feel like we get a little bit of a break. And hopefully we can answer some of your questions as well. And if you are going to drop a question, it would come from the Trails Collective Facebook or YouTube feed rather than my own personal one, as that's just what wires in. All right. So question 1. Your years at the Speed Clinic were an exciting time in the running and product world. Trending mechanics camps of the pose method, evolution running, and chi running coincided with McDougall's release of Born to Run. So 2 kind of topics or questions there. So what were the common threads present in those years in both your work in the Speed Clinic as well as some of those models referenced in that time?
In your question, this is funny because I was talking to a colleague yesterday about how golden that time period at University of Virginia was. We just had the most absolutely incredible lab, literally the most incredible lab in the whole world for running mechanics. And we had such a great personnel group that we worked with every day, and it was just awesome. So, I mean, to look back on that and think, there's a lot of people that have ideas and throw things out and, trying to push ideas forward, which is great. And, that was the first time in, our time that you could actually say, let's quantify it. If you want to put this out there, let's see if that's actually accurate or not. Right. And it was just such an amazing time to be able to do that. And if those of you who don't understand with fancy words like instrumented treadmills, when you go to a Gait lab, Gait lab is a research laboratory where we look at how people move, right? And so we have these little force plates embedded in the floor, and you run over them, and if you accidentally step like just off the plate or kind of on the plate, but also on the floor, or these weird spots, like the data is garbage, right? So you might run 50 times across and we only have 2 steps that are good. And that's how we publish papers, right? And so it's ridiculous. And plus you're always accelerating, decelerating. It doesn't really work. And so we had the second instrumented treadmill ever produced in the world. And treadmills, as we know, allow us to get steady state speed, right? So I can put you at 8-minute pace, 7-minute pace, 4-minute pace, whatever you're going to run at, and we can get multiple stride data while you're running. And so it actually allowed us to look at things in a much finer lens, because you can quantify force in the ground, range of motion, combine that to get moments, how hard your joints are all working, always like data, right? And so, I've always been somebody to say, look, if you're going to say something, well, fine, let's measure it and prove it, right? So it was a pretty interesting time to be able to look at things like chi and pose and say, are these accurate and valid? And so call bluffs and it's, I'll offer this too. I mean, it's nice to say is the technique or a method working, right? Because that tells you an average response, but every person listening to this is not the same as an average response. And so my big MO in life has been to try and take things individual, right? So yes, we learned that this group of 20 runners responded this way when we did this with them. And that's great. But like, that should guide your thought process, but it doesn't tell me how to help you, right? That's that doesn't work. So I think one of the big things we're able to do there is to really get into individualized care and have someone come off the street and say, okay, let's actually quantify your running mechanics. Let's quantify that against your range of motion, your strength, your stability, et cetera. See where you fall in the scheme and find out what you need, right? And so I think doing all that, a bunch of things came up, right? So ways to screen runners, and I've been a big advocate at it over the years to help put out tests and books and all kind of podcasts and lots of things to help people find out, do I have a problem with this? Do I have to, should I work on this or not? And then the second thing is to kind of push it forward for clinical teaching, right? So to try and help clinicians across the globe do a better job, because we've got so much data, like 5,000 runners we've actually got numerical data on, and nobody else has that, right? And a lot of noise goes away, and a lot of cool stuff kind of rises to the top when you've got a resolution like that. So it was a super fun time, and I learned a lot, and like I said, it's been something I try and give back because it was such a great experience.
And you were fresh out there, right? I mean, that was kind of your out of school segue into the career. And was that a trajectory you had intended to take, or did that just kind of like fell on your lap and that's the way your career went from there?
No, I mean, I always was into, I was an endurance athlete myself. And I mean, I did actually practiced at a patient sport and spine facility for 5 years prior to launching a clinic. And so, yeah, basically the whole thing wound up. We had a department chair. Casey Kerrigan came from Harvard, and she had a big startup fund, which means you have lots of money to buy cool toys. And so we started a bunch of research. And I said, one day I said, hey, Kim, why don't we use this stuff for individual analysis? And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, what if anybody could come in and actually get help? And she's like, I like this idea. So it was it was just a great gelling. And I said, it was the people we had in personnel. I'm still great friends with all of them. And it was just a wonderful time in my career.
So a part B there, and it may be kind of a tough question because how do you bottle all into just this answer? But what was a Crux takeaway or finding you were most excited about from those years?
Oh, I mean, I would say that technique matters. I mean, I swam, right? So it's like there wasn't a single day that we didn't ever do
stroke technique or flip turn practice.
It happens all the time, right? And running is this weird sport, right? Because it's very approachable. I mean, if you walked into a weight room and you saw somebody squatting 500 pounds, you can't squat 500 pounds on the first day. You work up to that, right? If you see somebody swimming, people have this fear of water. So they think, I can't do that right away. I have to work up to that. But, running's great. It's approachable because you can just buy a pair of shoes and go. And you have friends, it's social, but like people just talk about quantifying, what was your pace and what's your miles per week? That's all people talk about, which are the two most irrelevant things out there, honestly, if you look at longevity and health. And so, it's really looking at technique, and lots of people run different because you're all different and you're all going to run different. That's fine. But there's a right way for you to run. It's, really controlling your body well, and running's a skill. I mean, it's not just a volume button you turn up to 12, right? It's actually a skill. And, I mean, those of you who kind of don't get this, think about how you feel form-wise when you start running, and think about how you run when you're tired, right? Like, everyone gets tired, but I tell people just train backwards, right? If you know you're tired and exhausted, what do you have to do to fix your body so your form doesn't fall apart at 4 miles, 10 miles, 24 miles, whatever it's going to fall apart? Like, it's real simple to do this if you just come to your training with an objective mind and prepare for your goal at hand. And so I think that technique matters, and technique is not just run this way with pose or chi, whatever. It's being able to maximize your strength and your power as you're running stride after stride for every single run of the entire year. Not just, for 4 weeks in the off season when it's snow outside, you don't want to run outside. It's really about optimal preparation for the goals you have.
And maybe we'll, as we progress here, and as maybe we'll, in the context of Mobo Board or some of the other things, we'll get into maybe that neuro wiring, but it's interesting there too, because, right, you're thinking of, I don't know. So we're speaking here to like the Trails Collective, it's a trail audience, but I'm assuming any number of individuals will find us as people will search for your name or whatever down the line. But if you're really talking about, say, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, whatever connotates you're long past your kind of exhaustion point and you're still going, that there has been this focus on strength as a maybe a byproduct of muscle mass or whatever. And what you're really focused on is that hard wiring and the neural wiring, just to make it more efficient, and in hopes that you're recruiting more effectively when you do break down.
Yeah, it's a little, well, okay, it's a little bit of both. So I'll answer this kind of simply. So number one, for example, someone says, open up your stride as you run. It's a great cue. You've probably heard that before, and I've heard it before, and lots of coaches say it. And as an athlete listening to this, you probably heard it too. And open up your stride means take longer strides, right? Well, okay, does that happen from the front side? Do you actually want to overstriding? Does it happen from your low back, which most people do, right? Does it happen from pushing off better behind you, which is the goal, but most people don't get that, right? So, my point is, if you're going to tell somebody a cue or have some desired goal as a coach or an athlete, like, it needs to be executed well, right? So, the more you are in tune with how your body functions, right? Being able to, control your core, right? Which needs to basically twist back and forth as you run. Right? That's what happens when we run. It's not anything crazy. It's just like what you do. And people don't work rotational trunk work, and they should. It's to be able to control rotational control through your hip, right? Because your hip twists as it moves front to back. It does. It's to be able to dampen, absorb shock. And trail runners, you have inordinate amounts of load placed on your knees running downhill. And running alone will not prepare you for that. Like, I don't want to make that any more clear. I'll just say that you need to work on eccentric strength training for your knee. It's mandatory to make sure you can tolerate that load, stride after stride. And then, for foot and ankle, it all goes back to how we can steer and stabilize our foot and ankle too. So it's like, you've got to put those parts in, and you've got to prepare those joints to tolerate load. And then we talk about, it's kind of what I call in running Rewired, I call this all precision type work, right? Learning how to control the parts well. And then from the performance aspect, there is essential strength and power work done. And I think that, it's interesting. It's like, if we would have had this talk 20 years ago, people would have said, oh, you can't do strength work if you're an endurance athlete, you're going to kill yourself. And that's so. For anybody listening who still believes that, it's not even not true. It's actually unproven. There's tons of research studies that show that it's not the case. And there are tons of research studies that show that actually adding in strength and power will improve your running and longevity and health. In fact, there was a study done with 26,000 athletes, which is a lot. And there was a 33% reduction in running injuries just by adding in strength training. That's a huge shift, right? So, and
in that study, was that just basically making the point that it's generic, inserting any strength, let alone this specific protocol?
Right. It was a meta-analysis, right? So it wasn't one study. It was a meta-analysis looking at lots of studies. But basically, the idea is that, doing something helps, right? And so I'm happy to talk about what to do, but yeah, you need to do something for sure. And, it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a long time. And most of you listening, you're not going to bulk up. I know some people say, I bulk up easy. We're not looking to put on an hour and a half of time at the gym. You're not going to do much volume to get what we call hypertrophy, which is actually increase in muscle size. You can get strength gains, which is learning to control your body better, put out more force, and power gains, which is the real thing, which is applying more force down to the ground. There's great research to show that, if you train your body to put more force down to the ground, you'll naturally get more hang time or air stride after stride, right? Which means you're covering more distance with the same intensity stride after stride. So what's that mean? Well, you're running faster with the same intensity, right? So that's all gelled in, right? And so people say, what's most important? Like, I know people want to hit the one button of what's the one thing to do. Life isn't that simple, right? There's a lot of things you need to do to prepare yourself comprehensively for the things you want to do. And we know what those are now. And again, like, that's been the whole point of the lab, is to objectify those things and find out, how much do you really have to do? And then put, again, thousands of athletes through these interventions, right? And not just the elites. Yes, I work with a lot of elites, but I also work with grandma, right? Like, I love both of them just as much. And so what does grandma need compared to, the elite? What is, and everybody between? That's where the fun part is. And then, putting the personalities behind those and finding out what makes people tick. And that's the fun part of the job.
So, if I'm remembering his name right, as I was writing the question in the moment, I didn't look it up, should have stopped. But Reed Ferber, head of what was once the Calgary Running Endurance Institute, was conducting a fairly longitudinal long-term study into an X variable of injuries in running. That is why some people get injured and why others don't, even given similar mechanics, training, and equipment. I don't believe the Institute still exists by that name, and I never saw completion to that study. But I have seen over the years how that plays out, and how this has, even in the beginning, in those golden years where we were really looking further at mechanics. And as I found myself running behind other people and looking at their foot strike patterns and looking what they were wearing, and when it was maybe this traditional lens of, this is what a pronation control shoe should be doing, and it's clearly not working, or you should be in another shoe. And there was one individual, I wish I would have saved one of his shoes. It was probably an 80-year-old gentleman, came in. I think he was like a lifelong runner. He was wearing maybe like the New Balance 990 or something like that like classic gray shoe. And the thing, like, I couldn't even believe it, but it was basically like, the whole thing was like cleaved off at an angle, like it was totally gone on one side. And it was just like even if you got like 10% of the way there, like, it seems like you would long be injured, let alone 50, let alone like, how are you even moving in this? And it must have been a totally customized shoe for his mechanic or whatever. But if anybody was going to get injured, like, it was that guy. And yet he was coming in and basically asking for the same shoe. So what do you think about that theory of that some people just get injured and some people don't?
Yeah, so I know Reed. He's actually an amazing researcher, and so I'll offer this that kind of big hierarchical study of like why people get injured. Like, it's like saying why do people get in car wrecks? There's so many reasons, right? So what that study got narrowed down to is in Canada is awesome, right? Because they actually pay for prospective research to find out things, because they're trying to solve health crises and
novel approach.
Right. Like, we don't do in the US. Different discussion. Anyway, I'll put out an example, right? So one of the studies they looked at was one of the pieces of that big hierarchical study, right, was to look at why people get shin splints, right? And so, and then if you look at why people get shin splints, then is it possible to put in a very simple intervention to actually to again, like at a mass level, right, at scale, to say anybody's having these issues across Canada, can we actually put an exercise routine in to help this issue, right? And like, then things start to rise to the surface, right? It's looking for patterns for, why some people get things, why most people get things. Again, you're looking at averages. That's what happens. And again, no one listening to this podcast is an average. That's something I want to be clear with you. And so you start to get things kind of bubble up to the surface, right? And so when you're talking about how does it apply to the gentleman you're discussing with, had these crazy wear patterns on his shoes. I mean, everybody's got a little bit different shift in the axis in your joints, right? And so some people are going to move more than others. Some people are going to move at different times than others in the gait cycle. And that's normal. You're not going to change that. I mean, like, it's in fact, you'd be you'd be, in trouble if you're trying to change those things. So my goal isn't to try and take people back to an average. My goal is to find out, how much do you move? When do you move? How does that going to influence your running technique? Do you have enough stability to control that extra motion, right? So let's make it applied. So people always say I have flat feet and I have a high arch, it's rigid, whatever. I'm like, I don't care, right? Like I tell people real simple, if you have more range of motion than the average bear, then you should show up with more strength and control than the average bear. Like that's real simple, right? So, and if you have a really hypermobile, which means a floppy foot, and you don't control it very well, that's not smart, right? So what can you do? Would you get frustrated? No, you just spend some time training your feet, right? If you have dancers who kind of become runners later in life and have tremendous amount of hip mobility, they're like, oh, I'm kind of loose and wobbly. Like, well, let's just take this great mobility you've got and let's help you control it, right? And they're always like, oh wow, I can steer my body better, and that's the whole idea. So it's not, people look at things and they say, I have this, therefore it's a problem. Like, I just say you have this and it's unique, and sure, let's just train around it, right? So yeah, if you're a zebra in a field of horses, let's just treat you as a zebra.
All right, you've consulted, and some of these you're touching on points that I'll get to here in a little bit as well. So my apologies if it's not really redundant, but I would latch on to a couple of things you're saying here, but I may latch on to it here in just a second. So you've consulted quite a bit to running shoe companies over the years. I'd even reached out to you, I don't know, it was probably 8 years ago or something like that, regarding a custom footwear company thought that I was thinking of at the time, and working on a little bit in communication with a friend, Scott McCubry. And then I saw that on your somewhere, I think yours maybe associated with Vamazi as well. And he was in contact with Tucker. And so there was this larger like interplay of shoe companies that you've consulted to. Some of the recent, I guess, I don't even know if evolution is the right word, but like market trends or whatever. Let's lead with this one. If you created a shoe company from the ground up, Dicharry shoes, what would they look like?
They'd, for one, look like golf clubs, because you have a different club, different purposes. And I'll make this clear. There's not one best running shoe. But do I just get to make one, or can I make a cluster?
Well, and as I was writing the question, I was thinking that same thing. I was like, are you gonna launch as like Speedland did, and like this is your one trick pony like out of the gate, or do you get multiple? And knowing you'd say that, where it would be like, well, there's not one like perfect shoe. Of course, you're gonna have a broad lineup, but I guess I guess that would maybe be the answer. I mean, I guess what would your company look like?
Well, okay. Number one, it would be a line of shoes. So there's the reason why I'm stalling on this point. Let's think about this, and forgive me for those of you who don't ski, but this is a really simple analogy. I think it helps a lot. If you ski boots have a certain flex rating, right? There's for alpine ski boots, you can buy a ski boot that's like a 90, which is like a kid would use, right? And like a 130, which is like a hard charger adult who weighs normal adult weights would use, right? And if you put the child in, if I put my 14-year-old daughter who weighs 94 pounds in a 130 ski boot, she can't even flex enough to drive the ski. So stiffer is not always better, right? If you put me in her 110 boots, I can flex through those things too aggressively because I'm heavier and stronger, right? So it's like you just need to match equipment for what people have, right? What people's needs are. So hopefully the analogy makes some sense. So let's take this to running. So if you are running at, let's say, I'm just going to use myself, I'm 165 pounds. And if I'm running at 830 pace, I'm going to put very different loads through that shoe as I would if I'm running sub 5 pace. Okay. Because the time on ground is different and the amount of force is different and dramatically different, right? Not just a little bit different. And so one shoe is not going to work for you. The cushioning properties in one pair of shoes is not going to work for you across a wide variety of paces, unless you use adaptive materials, which are, there's lots of companies that have these now, but basically if you load them faster, they actually get stiffer, and stiffer is a good thing for elasticity to run. And if you load them slower, i.e. running slower, they don't ramp up as fast. So if you had a shoe in a certain range that would allow it to be adaptive, meaning it can react well at slow and fast speeds, that'd be a win for me, right? But then that's one mass, right? So then you've got to consider the fact that people weigh lots of different weights, right? And there's different structure as well. So what I I would have, as a big proponent of my shoe, of Dicharry shoes, I would have tuning involved where, and again, like this is interesting too, because you could have I mean, it's just a math problem is all it is, right? You could have a 110-pound female running 5:10 pace, and she's putting the same net compressive force on the cushioning material of the shoes as a 180-pound male running whatever, 10:30 pace, right? So there's a big continuum there, and this is, I'll put this in here as a personal beef I've got with the current industry. I can't stand, and women, I'm sorry if you take this complaint the wrong way, but let me finish before you judge me. You're being lied to by a bunch of companies saying we have the needs of a woman's shoe and we know what women need. Like, okay, back up, all right? Because when you look at data, right, data is de-identified in terms of gender. All I care about is what's optimal. And it really comes down to mass and speed and stride length and some contractile protein stuff, which no one can change, right? But that's how you look at the cushioning properties of shoes. Women do not need their own cushioning. That's ridiculous to say that. So I would have a shoe that's basically tuned. The cushioning properties in the shoe would be tuned for what you need, right? Yeah. If you like certain colors, it's fine, great, whatever. But that's not to say that that's saving you. So that would be one big part of it. And the second thing I would do is I certainly would have. I mean, I run a lot of trail because that's what I just like to do. I would have some different traction configurations that you see out there, a lot of companies using, and there's some I find it funny that plates are a big thing right now.
This is going to be my follow-up question here.
I've been using plates for 18 years in custom shoe mods, and they're not new for me. All a plate does is tune the compression of the footwear. It's real simple. Mizuno's been using them forever too, right? So they're great to use. And I've got some secret configurations I've developed over the years that work really, really well. So I'd use a lot of those.
All right. Well, all right. Then maybe I'll probe that here in a second. I know you have some hesitancy here. So there's probably certain things, and in your professional relationships too, that you can't make any specific ones, and you probably don't want to reveal some things or whatever. But all right. So let me hang on to that thought, because the follow-up was going to be, and to your point, because plates are not new. Carbon's not new. They've been trying to get that formula to work in the market in terms of just feel, but also mass adoption for 40 years or whatever. It seems like Nike was the first to pin down a functional design, making a plate work and sync, and to have also then the machinery and the direct consumer kind of market behind it. What have you, and in my head, I feel like it was the plate will create that stable platform and a fairly rigid platform for takeoff. And the right blend of kind of a soft midsole foam allowed the plate to sink into that and kind of eat up runners' inefficiencies and basically allow the plate to do its job. And you can correct me with your thoughts there, but also, what do you think of those designs and how rockers, plates, and contraptions both support and contradict your work on the natural power of the feet?
So, okay, lots of questions in there. Number one, let's create two categories for everybody listening. Number one, you've got, let's just call conventional running shoes, which you've had for forever. Those shoes all have certain amounts of cushioning. Okay. And cushioning basically compresses, and then the material will kind of go back to what it was. But if you're going to say that a shoe returns energy to you, a conventional cushioning type shoe, that doesn't happen. I know shoe companies out there have used this marketing for years. It's mechanically impossible. Okay. But the job of those shoes is to dampen the impact. And it's been shown in multiple studies that doing that offsets some of the work you have to do to dampen your impact, right? And so there's a reason shoes are cushioned. In fact, running barefoot it actually takes it away and makes it metabolically harder. Okay, it's been shown as well. So we can come back to that point if people have more questions on that. But what this new category of footwear is doing, let's just call them super shoes because people love to use that word.
Or cheater shoes, either one.
Yeah, or cheater shoes, yep. And so, they're cheating. Okay. And here's the thing. So again, I was a swimmer, right? So those of you who swam, remember nobody swims, right? But those of you who did swim, a long time ago, Speedo came out with a hydrophobic fabric, which was slipperier than skin. And a bunch of records were made with that suit. And IAAF came out and said, this suit is actually, it works, right? It's mechanically slipperier than everything else out there. We're going to establish a quotient. If you're lower than this, then you can't use this fabric because it's cheating. Cycling has gone through this as well, right? We have limits on where your saddle can be for time trials, for the pursuit hour record. All kind of things have happened because you can like cheat the system using biomechanics and aerodynamics. And they said, look, that's great, but we don't want to make sports about technology. We want to make them about sport, right? Well, running is this weird state because they have to decide if they want to be romanticized by the idea of sub 2 hour marathons or make it about sport. Running has chosen to make it about romanticizing sub 2 hour marathons. These brand of super shoes, the job of the shoe is to, all right, let's back up for a second. Go jump on your wherever floor you're right now, carpet, hardwood, whatever, outside concrete, your deck, doesn't matter. Jump, right? And see how hard it is to jump. And then go on your kid's trampoline. If you don't have a kid, go jump the fence and jump on their trampoline and jump and see which is easier to jump on, the trampoline or the floor. Obviously, trampolines have a ton of what we call excursion, right? When you jump, that netting underfoot goes down, 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 not just an inch or two, but a lot, okay? And that excursion allows you to have a huge rebound effect, right? And so every shoe out there in what we call traditional footwear, its job has been to squish and then just kind of go back to what it was. That's it. Super shoes are engineered totally different. They're designed to actually allow a translation of your center of mass so the whole body sinks and then pops back up again. And the issue we've got here has become a marketing nightmare for a bunch of companies because IAAF won't let you put a carbon spring or any spring in a shoe. So they have to say, oh, no, it's the foam. Okay, it's real simple, people. All this is, you have a ground, right? And which is doesn't move, and you've got you on top, right? So your foot is squishing the spring and then rebounding. And so what matters? All of it matters. The tuning of the foam and the plate and the foam on top, right? And your foot. And so what they're doing is they're allowing for a lot of translation. So basically you have a trampoline underfoot, which is allowing it to squish and rebound, squish and rebound. And I find it ironic that no one has actually been smart enough to read through all the weeds on the legality of these, because the only thing IAAF came back with to say that, you know, what they're going to moderate on this is your stack height of your shoe, right? And so what they said was, you know what? We're going to be okay with a trampoline that's 44 millimeters high. After that, that's illegal. But they're just letting people put trampolines underfoot, right? And so the problem is, those of you who jumped on the trampoline doesn't just push you up, it also pushes you where? A little bit to the side, in, out, back, forth. It makes you wobble around in space. And so what you're seeing is a ton of people wearing these super shoes and getting hurt because they're very unstable, because things can't rebound in one direction. They rebound in all directions. It's just physics, right? So that's one problem. And the second problem is, and this is the thing that just makes me giggle more than anything, they're not designed for you yet. Okay? They're designed for elite weight runners who don't weigh much. I mean, some of you may weigh a little bit, as I'm not, pointing fingers, but they're designed again with a suit and tuning range. And what you've got, which just makes me laugh hysterically, is a lot of successful, businessmen who weigh 190 and 200 pounds, sit behind a desk all day, buying these $400 shoes, thinking they're going to make them faster. And they're not going to hurt them unless they're totally unstable, but because they will magnify your imbalances. But they're not going to help you, right? Because you're too heavy for the tuning of that trampoline. So if you want to run on a trampoline, you need to make sure it's tuned for you. And companies are starting to come out with, different tuning parameters to because if these are going to go mass market, they have to, because people are going to say, why am I not getting a 4% improvement on my speed? Well, it's not designed for you, right?
Well, that's a whole, I guess that's an interesting concept too, right? I mean, here years later, you've got some of these companies that have released designs that then related in any slogan that they were allowing to get out there, then with lawsuits after that. So, I mean, to your point, I mean, is that kind of a class action? Hey, I'm not getting 4% out of the shoe, and you're allowing this kind of slogan to be associated with our product.
Sure.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just sitting back and eating popcorn.
Right. Which, oh man, speaking to your golden years, like you've been in it, like from the beginning, from the SpeedClink all the way through. This has been an exciting time, from a kind of mechanics to then this kind of change in whatever shoe tech or whatever. And I was about to say, as you were talking, like how my first reaction, because I agree in terms of some of them, there's a shoe from a company over here right next to me that was put out, and it was designed originally with a last around a, I'm just going to grab it, whatever. Hang on a second. All right. So you have this shoe with basically a lateral fin design designed around one of their pro athletes' feet. And when they first designed it and they were generalizing it, I was like, well, what are you doing? Like, that was designed specifically to this one athlete's foot, and like that doesn't really work for like other people. And so that was an initial gripe. But when it finally arrived, the midsole foam, like itself, sorry, I'm forgetting where my camera is. I'm looking over here on the screen, but it's so spongy that like it's one of my daughter's favorite shoes at the moment. But now I just asked her to not wear it anymore because it's so unstable that I see her motion going, to your point, like every which way. And it's just, so part of me is like, all right, so is there do you pull back from there? Like, if it's agreed upon that maybe the sub 2 hour marathon isn't the focus, that the sport is, do you pull back? And at the same time, can you pull back? And do most people want to pull back if they feel like they're kind of lock or, hook and sinker into this is going to make me faster?
All right. I have a little soapbox on this, if you'll permit me. So, our PE system in schools has failed lifelong health, right? Our kids are playing dodgeball, and I want my kids to have fun too, but like, they need to have proper movement education, right? Learn how to move, learn how to stabilize your body. Put that in. I do it in classes here, right? Why can't you do that at a mass scale nationwide? So what we've done is we've taken kids who are wobbly, unstable, and we just throw a bunch of mileage at them for a short period of time of the year. And then they said, we wonder why their knees hurt, and they had shin splints, all that stuff. They weren't prepared for it, right? And so that's a big problem, that we're not preparing our kids for lifelong success in any sport, really. Okay. And so that's one problem. The second problem is, again, like limitations on what kids should be doing and wearing, etc. I mean, if you look at youth cycling, there's a gear cluster limitation. Those of you who ride, you have a cassette in the back of your bike with a certain amount of teeth, excuse me. And so there are limits on what juniors are allowed to use for size because they're worried about health of your joints long term. Well, fine. Why don't we have youth limits on what they're allowed to wear for footwear? They shouldn't. I think these super shoes should not be allowed. The shoes are not going to hurt you. Okay, my phone's not going to hurt me unless I throw it in my head, right? Shoes aren't going to hurt you unless you do something dumb with them. And something dumb is not controlling your body very well. So all these shoes are very unstable, and they will magnify your imbalances. Okay, so again, the shoes are not the reason why people are getting hurt, but I will tell you that the vast majority of athletes, and it's the elites who got these first, all got hurt right away because they're running a certain, mileage per week, right? And an engineer comes to them and says, hey, I got this prototype. It's going to make you run faster. Give it a whirl, right? And like, oh, great. Right? And they just throw it on and jump in their mileage, and their body's not used to that shoe. And again, a lot of elites are always constantly kind of struggling on the edge of what they can tolerate because that's what sport is, right? And so a lot of them broke down and got hurt, and some people missed some very big races because of these types of shoes. So you get, like anything, you have to adapt to it. Make yourself adapted to the new footwear, and again, improve your body skills so that you can help, again, transition these things safely. So if they're going to be viable and they're going to stick around, which it appears that they are, I hope people put some attention on getting themselves prepared for them, because as a runner, you probably think, I should probably hit some certain splits, right? If I want to train for hit this goal of the race, like, well, okay, as a runner, if you should probably control your body well, if you're going to put it in shoes, which are inherently more unstable. So like, there's a lot of things that kind of come in this question. I love your question. It's great. I hope I answered a few of those, but we need to get people better developed for the sports they want to do. And the equipment that we're using is in super shoes is one designed around hitting a PR and not around really helping you from a longevity and durability standpoint. And those two goals have now diverged, right? And so we got to do something to help pull people back, not pull people back, but give people better tools to succeed.
Sure. And to be able to put it out there, I guess, in the dialogue. I mean, it's all just keeping up with the Joneses at this point, and whether it makes sense at all, it's almost like besides the point. It's like, what's the next brand's, like, I don't know, whatever, they're keeping up, and there's no, you're not stopping to actually process or look at data or have those conversations. And I don't know, it's interesting. All right.
That's what, I mean, and that's what IAAF did, right? They said, okay, here's your stock height limit. Within this limit, you do whatever you want, right? And again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not gonna argue in front of a jury, but they're all springs, right? They're all spring shoes. So I know they say they're not because they have to market them differently, but they're all a bunch of springs. And they, now it comes into what type of materials, how much, the composition, the tuning, whatever. So that's gonna be an interesting thing to watch and see what happens over time. Those of you who love this stuff, you should read. My friend Brian Metzler wrote a book called Kicksology, which I highly recommend. Folks read. It just talks about like how footwear has evolved, where things are going, some trends we've seen. It's a great read. So sorry.
All right, and this will probably be, and we'll maybe tie in, or we'll start segueing into Mobo here in a second, because I think this would be an example of, if you're gonna now expose yourself to all these crazy dynamics or whatever, you better hope that your body's resilient enough and wired enough to kind of take what's coming at it. But all right, and so here, so I'm in the Finger Lakes running company here, run specialty store, and years ago. So I opened in 2006, and probably the first few years we were open, we were doing more video analysis and getting people up on a treadmill, slowing it down, looking frame by frame. And then there was one of the times where I was listening to Reed speak, and maybe even asked a question at that breakout session. But he basically made the comment, or his answer was, unless you have a, whatever it is, like a $40,000 camera, unless you have a force plate treadmill or force plates or whatever, like, you're not seeing what you think you're seeing, like in those frames. And basically, even if you are, then what do you do with that? And so around that time, I started thinking it just didn't feel right anymore. It's like, this is more smoke and mirrors. I don't have this equipment. I don't think that we're necessarily seeing. And then again, what do you do with that? So for run specialty stores out there, and your focus has been on the wiring, the foot fitness, but you also work in the design. And we're surrounded by, I've got surrounded here by shelves and shelves of shoes, all in like different categories that are now like kind of melding or molding. What would you say to all the run stores? And maybe you'll say, I don't know, dude, like it's your thing. Like, what would you say about the fit process? How should they be fitting shoes and feet?
Yeah. So, okay. There's a few things in there. So one, let me just say this, what I've done in my career is relatively new, right? Like the tools we're looking at to assess runners are only in the past 20 years, right? This isn't stuff that's been, I mean, there's been studies long-term, but like to have high resolution tools is relatively new, right? So what happens in anything, right? You've got a group of experts, these labs that's sitting there inside of a lab and just focusing things in a lab. And they have to get like gold standards established and find out what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, how do people respond to things, right? And then you like to take things out into the world with real sensors, right? So you basically gather data on people while they're running in their neighborhood and trails and all the stuff that everybody listening to loves to do. And that's been frustrating because we've all been promised wearable technology. I actually had a wearable tech startup years ago. This is like 10 years ago. And we had some amazing algorithms that we tested on our lab setup, and they were bulletproof, but the hardware that we had at the time was garbage because all these little IMU immersion, when you look at your phone and like you put a little the level app and your phone like wobbles around, you can see it tell you degrees. It's measured by something called an IMU, or an inertial measurement unit, right? And so we were told that next year this thing's coming, it's gonna be amazing, and let you get data outside the real world. And well, we're still waiting, right? So there's a few companies out there who put some things out pretty cool, but my point is it's hard to get data in the real world. And so then you say, okay, well, it's hard to get data at run specialty. And I know a few brands have come out with different tools and things and tricks to get some things. And again, some of it's marketing, some of it's real, some of it's both. But I would say that to objectify the fit process is the goal, right? So instead of having someone say, you sort of kind of do this weird wiggle thing, like, no, let's say you pronate late at this time in Gait, and then all the people who do that also follow the pattern of responding better to this type of shoe. So that makes sense. Like there's a lot of kind of correlations that have to occur to get there.
It does, right? But then, and then that's even like in that process though. But then again, like, what do you do with that, right? Then is it like, well, actually, you're going to get as an example, well, it looks like that's okay. You pronate late, but actually, that's not a bad thing. Your body needs to do it. Otherwise, you're going to mess up something up chain, or maybe it's over. And really, the reality is that the research doesn't suggest that the shoe is actually going to do something about that. But this Mobo board would, like as an example. But it's like, what you do with that data if the acknowledgement is that certain footwear designs don't necessarily do what we thought that they would do historically.
Yes, that is true. That is true. So, the if I could summarize the past, let's say the thinking up until last maybe 10 years ago was certain shoes would stop your foot from moving, certain would move with your foot, and certain would increase the motion of your foot. That's complete. It's, again, not only not true, it's been proven to be untrue. So what you're left with is, okay, well, then how do I break footwear down and give my customers help, right? So people are going to move different. Number one, they're going to move variable. Ben Onig is a widespread researcher who's, put this idea out there behind shoes should be comfortable, right? And listeners are probably like, of course they should be comfortable, right? But comfort is, hard to objectify, right? So if you look at his work, comfort means a shoe that feels semi-firm, right, but still compliant, meaning moves with your foot. You don't want something that feels like you're running on a piece of wood that's laced up to your foot, right? But you want something that's going to be compliant, but still springy, right? So firmer cushioning is better than soft, squishy cushioning. Now, super shoes violate this rule a little bit because, again, you've got a lot of excursion with that trampoline under your foot. But with all non-super shoes, you want something to be firm underfoot, compliant, move with your foot's really important, really, really important, because if it doesn't move with your foot, it's basically creating a big lever arm to throw you and move odd. So what you've seen over the years is shoes have become what? We've taken a lot of stability elements out of the shoe, things that made them stiffer, right? And so most shoes are starting to move with the foot more. It's interesting, that example you mentioned of your gentleman, a little bit ago, saying, he wore down the outside edge. Like, that's something that happened because his body moved in a different axis, right? And over time, it basically created a rocker on the outside of his shoe, and that's allowed him to move the way he's supposed to. And people think, oh, this is worn down. No, it's like almost like if he would have said, I'll take any shoe off your wall and take a Dremel to it and put that in on day one, right? That would have helped him out a lot. So it took miles to sort of configure it for him. If you
so I guess on that note, then, like, is that, and I guess it depends. It would depend on the individual and
Sure.
how they're set up. But I was about to say, like, should I just been like, dude, like, you literally, it was cleaved all the way up into the last of the shoe. Like, it wasn't just like the outsole was worn off. Like, it was fully through the entire midsole and up like into the lasting, whatever. But should I have been like, dude, like, you just spent whatever amount of miles making that shoe perfect for your body. Dude, don't get a new pair of shoes. Like, you're just going to have to do that all again. Like, is that kind of what you want? Or is it just like, I don't know, it depends?
Well, I'd say it depends, but I'll offer this. People say all the time, by watching someone run, can you tell what's wrong with them? And I would say no. By watching someone run, you can tell how they move. And I cannot watch anyone run and find out if that's good or bad or normal for them or not normal for them, right? Until I actually take them down on a table and do a individual musculoskeletal analysis, find out what their joint configuration looks like, how mobile are certain joints, how supple are things, how strong or stable are you, right? Like, that's why we do these things. So, and once you have, I always tell everybody, like, my job has been ridiculously easy. I've got individual musculoskeletal assessment for every athlete I work with, and I've got hard number lab data. At that point, it's just, okay, boop, 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 compute, go. Like, my job's so easy. Now, it's taken me forever to figure out how those things blend together, right? But unless you are a retailer who's doing individual analysis on people, it's really hard for you to tell somebody that this is even normal or not normal for you. Forget good and bad, right? Because you don't know how the foot's supposed to move. Like, I'm guessing pretty hard that person had a very low subtalar joint axis, okay, which is basically, think about the axis as a pivot point, right? I'm guessing his axis was very different than the average bear, right? So again, zebra in a field of horses. Zebras are great too. We just have to treat them differently. So if we were to understand that, right, acknowledge that, I bet you would have gone, oh, well, I see why this is actually something that's developed in his footwear, and actually he probably feels better running in that right now. So to get to your point of, does watching someone run help you feel more confident about the shoes they're in? I think that it's worth doing for sure. For one reason alone, most runners have come in and they say, I've run in this one shoe forever and I never want to change. And most runners don't try different things, right? And I think that trying something different might open your eyes as a runner. To the fact that different shoe cushioning properties might feel different shoe shapes might feel different rockers might feel different. There's so many things in a shoe can be different. And so I'd encourage you to try different things. And I'd encourage you as a retailer, just look at things and say, hey, like, okay, I noticed, well, actually don't say anything. Hey, what do you notice, right? And then you can confer those and say, oh, I noticed this or that or whatever. But so that's one piece of the puzzle. And the second thing is, I started alluding to this earlier, but running science is new, right? And so one of the things that I mean, all the research idiots like myself are trying to do is to say, okay, look, we know you don't have $1 million lab at your store, but you know what? You do have some high speed. You know, I'm literally right now in the process of writing a revision for a Gait chapter in a medical textbook on running analysis, and it's laughable because I wrote this 10 years ago. I had all these equipment requirements, what you need, and like you have to have this frame rate, everything else, and buy this camera. And the cameras I bought at my lab at the time, these cameras, which were $7,500 a piece, captured 120 frames per second at 780p. The phone I just got for Verizon contract, right? I didn't pay nothing for this, is like light years beyond. So all the retailers out there, you already have the equipment you need. What you need to do is be guided in how to use it, right? So for example, looking at the distance of foot contact to body line, right? Looking at the things like this were kind of checklists, and I've made my own scoring for this. It's called the Visual Gait Tool, and I publish this. It's a way to kind of guide people through an assessment, not to say it's something good or bad, to say, oh, this is what my athlete's doing, and then let me now take what I see, right? And we've kind of like gotten a formal thought process, and can I now take that and go back and find out, you know, again, does the runner have enough control, flexibility, et cetera, to match these parameters, or are they in trouble? And this might, you know, lead them over the edge. So, and that's, again, that's not something which is super simple to do. I understand that, but that's where things should be. So if, you know, if you're going to a running retailer and they're giving you, you know, advice, you're a running retailer trying to do a better job, like just know where you feel comfortable, right? And you know, I've taught these tests all over the country for years. So if you feel comfortable doing some of these tests, you definitely should do that. You're a big boon to your client base. And if you're getting tested by some of these as an athlete listening to this podcast, then great. It's awesome, right? But if you don't feel comfortable doing some of these, your technique might not be right, like try and get better at these, because you can gain some information even not being a clinician. And I think that we can do a better job for sure helping our athletes with a more organized thought process. And that's something industry has been kind of hamstrung with for years, because shoe companies don't want to be a provider, right? They're not a medical company. But you've seen some trends, and hopefully we'll see more where retailers are trying to do a better job to match people to the right shoes, because there's tons of people that say, what's the best shoe? Lots of great shoes, right? The key is to match it. And again, for me, with a lab and an exam table, it's really easy, but that's not widespread. So it's hopefully it'll get better.
Yeah, that's fair. And that there would have been a take all question too, then getting back to like rocker geometries and whether that's necessary. But it could be, well, I don't know. Like if you get out there and there's something with your gait where that feels more comfortable and is doing something for you, like, I don't know, like maybe that's good for you then. And that kind of worked. Or
well, it's like, yeah. So I had a patient years ago. She really struck into me. So she had some very different geometry in her foot, right? And so she had been running for years. She was like mid-50s, just a wonderful lady. And you know, she had just, you know, just conventional type. She ran in kind of a stability or cushion shoe for most of her career, and she was wonderful, right? And then all this stuff came out with minimalism, and she thought, well, I'm a runner and I identify as a runner, and if I can't run in minimal shoes, then I'm a horrible person. And she got really beat up, and she'd get these streaks where she'd get these minimal shoes and get hurt, and then she have to go back to her normal stuff and felt fine, right? And she'd try and get back in again, and like, and she came and saw me like, what's going on? I'm going crazy. I'm like, look, your foot doesn't move like a normal foot would move. Doesn't mean it's a bad foot. It's a great foot. We can work wonders with this thing, but like, you need some rocker. You actually need a little bit of heel height in your footbed. And she's like, no, that's wrong. I'm like, no, like, I had to give her a little mini biomechanics class on like how ankles and balls of feet work together. They let you roll through. And I'm like, your foot doesn't roll through like an average foot, right? And so your foot has a little bit of a wiggle to it. And when you take that away by going to minimal shoes, you're forcing other joints in your body to move away. And not just her foot, by the way, it was her hip pain was actually bugging her. And I was like, it doesn't work that way. So, we had to have a talk and we gave her a little anatomy, a little biomechanics class. And she's like, oh, I get this now. Right. And like, so again, like if you know to look for these things, they're really easy to figure out when does somebody need some of these extra features and when are they irrelevant. So again, there's lots of great things on your retail wall. The question is, how do you match those the best? That's not easy to do at a mass scale right now.
All right. Question in from Nathaniel Huff. Question for Jay. Are some runners more likely to be quad dominant as a product of natural hip inflexibility, or are they inflexible because of quad dominance and neuromuscular?
Great question, Nathaniel. How's it going? So I would say the bigger take home is going to be the latter, right? So, well, I should say this. Quad dominance just means what do you bias towards in terms of propulsion? Using more front side muscles to push you along or backside muscles to push you along as you run. So most people do not open up their hip range of motion enough. Some of that is actually neuromuscular, meaning if you don't do something for a long time, then you just don't do it, right? So practicing like hip openers, like dynamic kind of type work is great. Like those of you who kind of Google world's greatest stretch, it's not a prolonged stretch you hold. It's this little routine. You kind of get in a little lunge, kind of twist back and forth, but it's basically just getting you to open up your back hip. And it's not a conventional stretch where you hold things for time. It's more just telling your brain, oh, we can get here and hold this position. Great. Flexibility is great, but if you don't have the neuromuscular wiring, right, to use that new range of motion, you'll never change your quad dominance, right? So we've done research on this and had people, we had 200 individuals. It's a walking study, by the way, but we actually looked at their hip range of motion and we classified people into tight and not tight groups and had people do stretches to open up their hip range of motion. And then we actually quantified that. So in our motion analysis lab, looked at how much range they had and then looked at, do they use it when they walked? And the take home of that study is if you stretch, you will improve your range of motion, but you don't change your gait. That's a problem, right? So if the whole goal of opening up your hip range of motion is to improve your stride mechanics, stretching's not going to do it. Right? It might be part of it if you're sufficiently tight. Now, as a runner, you don't have to be, a yoga Gumby person, right? Super hypermobile. You have to have good control through your range. So if you can get 15, 20 degrees of hip extension, which is not a ton, that's great. But if you start to control and use it, that's the key thing. So I would say the more important part of this is you have to have enough range of motion. After you have enough, don't worry about stretching, working on using your hip extension range. That's the most important thing.
And I think that's a good segue then into taking us there. So in your career, at least in terms of your what you've published, and you've have corresponding research along the way as well, but started with the anatomy of runners or for runners, really getting it out there, getting us in tuned with applicable anatomy to the running process. Then you went into running Rewired, and now into from there like the Mobo Board. So you've basically honed into this larger set. You've gotten more started into the concept of the rewiring, and that was you've got a lot of content in this book, and now honed it into, all right, here's the crux piece. Like here's an example of the wiring. Here's where it maybe is most like applicable or whatever. Do you see it as this, you kind of moving through to this space and this is where you've arrived and this should be the focus, or is like what you set out in running Rewired just as important on top of the Mobo Board?
So it's really funny. All those projects weren't an evolution. They were all frustrations. And what I mean by that is Anatomy for Runners was written at a time when, again, you had people saying, oh, you must do this and everyone must do that. And like, I want to be like, BS. No, that's not true. Right. And the problem was there was no layperson textbook for Anatomy for Runners. And so Anatomy for Runners was written for people like you who really want to know the answers. Right. And, very hyper cerebral runners and coaches and PTs who knew the body but didn't really understand running, right? That's who the audience of Anatomy for Runners was for. I'm still very proud of a lot of the work in that book, and it's held up very well over the years. And so that was great. And then what you've got is the mass public, right? Who that book was too technical for, right? And they wanted a little theory, but more, they just want a story, and they want, okay, great, I get that. That makes sense to me now. So what do I do, right? So Run and Rewired was written to give people literally plans and say, look, follow this plan, like, right? And then on day 2, do this plan. And on day 3, do this plan, then rotate them this way. So it's very prescriptive. So you can kind of follow the plan and not have to think too much. And then it got, I had this realization where it's like, okay, well, if you want to add weight, you can go grab a kettlebell, right? And if you want to, use something at home, you can get TheraBand, and you can work muscles through full range of motion. I use bicep because it's simple all the time, right? But if you do bicep curls, you don't just move halfway, you move a full range of motion, right? It's real simple. You use full range of motion for our hip rotation and core work and all that kind of stuff, right? So I looked at the foot and I looked at what people were doing, and they're just like wiggling their toes and moving TheraBand back and forth. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, if you're an athlete, you're doing things in what we call closed chain, which means supporting your own weight. And you have to control your foot and ankle through full range of motion while you are supporting your own weight. Well, there's no product out there that lets people actually do that. So Mobo was born out of a frustration. There were no tools out there. And basically, from my standpoint, it's pretty simple. The board tilts. And the axis of that board is exactly how your subtalar joint, which is the axis you pronate and supinate through, move when you walk and run. So again, I know your ankle bends kind of front to back, and people think, well, that's not true, but your foot doesn't move that way. Your foot moves as diagonal, right? And so Mobo allows you to train your foot to move diagonal. And one of the compensation, and so right now, you can take the fins and you can put them in different configurations to work 2 different diagonals in how the foot moves. Again, that's the key thing. Like, we didn't develop this product and say, let's take a product and market it to runners. No, I said, let's take the anatomy that people move and then make something to train that, right? It was designed, which I think is the right way versus just putting crap out there. But that's one key feature on the board. The second key feature on the board is that there's a hole where your little toes are, and there's a contact point under your big toe. And so when you think about how your anatomy works, your big toe is mechanically, meaning the joint structure, and neurologically, meaning how your foot next to your brain, wired independently of your little toes. Little toes have 3 joints in each toe, and they're designed to curl and bend around. And those of you who scrunch your toes, you just curl your toes. If you do that right now, if you're looking at your foot, you curl your toes, you'll notice that the ball of your foot actually comes up off the floor. You've lost any contact point. That's not a way to train your foot at all for any weight-bearing exercise like running. So your big toe is, again, mechanically different. It's got 2 joints in it, not 3, and it has a different job. It's designed to push down, not to curl. And we have kneecaps in our knees, right? You actually have 2 little kneecap bones in your big toe called your sesamoids. And those are pulleys, which change the leverage of muscle support inside your foot. So my point is, like, your big toe is very, very, very different, right? It's got a different number of joints, and it's got some pulleys to help it work to really help us get better push off. And when your big toe works well, it pushes your arch back up for better stability. And not just from the foot, your big toe works to steer your arch and your entire foot and your hip, right? And so when you train on a Mobo, you're sort of cued, or actually a better word is forced. If you're going to work rotational control on your foot, you're also forced to work rotational control on your hip. So now you're actually not just training a muscle, you're training coordination inside of your entire body. So it allows you to work that rotational diagonal kind of axis in a way that mimics things that we do, like walk and run. So it's a tool that's used, again, with a bunch of other tools, right? Like weights and bands and everything else. But it was designed out of frustration, the fact that people had no options besides just wiggle your toes around or try and balance on this wobbly, squishy thing, which is ridiculously stupid, because those of you who have like soft, squishy pads, soft, squishy pads are taking away information that we use to establish this fancy word called proprioception, which is position sense, right? So when you take away that sensory information, you make it harder for you to balance. Now, most of you, when you put you on that, you wind up leaning and wobbling and flying an airplane with your hands. That doesn't transfer over to running, right? So we want that instability stimulus to be done on a hard piece of material. That's why Mobo's hard, not a bamboo. And we want it to be wobbly enough to make you have to stabilize and cue properly, but not so wobbly that you can't figure out what to do and are very unstable and fall over. Like that's ridiculous, right? So it's designed with a very intended focus on purpose, right, to help you get the most out of your training sessions. So that's why it was designed, and it's been, I'd say, pretty successful in getting people to attention and go, oh, like this is a game changer, because when you look at, again, like, plantar fascial problems, Achilles tendinopathy, shin splint issues, metatarsal pain, Morton's neuroma stuff, it all goes back to, I tell people all the time, don't worry about your diagnosis. I know your healthcare provider told you have this condition. That's not the problem. The problem is you're a wobbly, unstable mess in your foot coordination, right? Like that's the issue. And the weak link in the chain was your plantar fascia or your Achilles or your posterior tibial tendon issue. Whatever. That doesn't matter. Like fix the problem, right? So you need to get coordination. And those of you are like, that doesn't matter. I don't get it. Like 20 years ago, no one was doing core work, right? Now everybody's doing core work, right? And so it's like, then like 12 years ago, nobody was doing hip stability work. Now what? Everybody's doing hip stability work, right? And so it's like, it's funny to me to watch evolution. Like now foot's becoming trendy, right? Because things are always trendy, but like people are finally getting the message that you have to work all your parts. Like it's real simple. You don't work one part. What's the one exercise? There's not one exercise. There's a lot of exercises that work to complement our structure. And so, it was designed to solve a problem, and it's worked very well.
And it's awesome. It's cool. There was one as I was listening to, I think, one of your podcasts earlier, prepping, and I tried to do my due diligence, but I would love to talk to you for hours. I'm going to respect your time, and I won't hold you here too much longer. But as I was preparing and listening to some of your other stuff, there was one of my employees was working with a customer out on the store floor that I could just hear from over the wall, and it was an individual who came in with, I think it was her big toe kind of jacking up and punching through the fabric of the shoes. And there's very little shoes anymore that still keep a toe guard there to protect that fabric. And it's either leading with your extensor hallucis, or you're getting some motion where you're rolling through, that big toe's kicking up. Maybe you're getting too much taper and that's kicking up. But really it's speaking to not necessarily, yes, the shoes aren't catering to you and they're not necessarily protecting the fabric anymore, but we can't really, unfortunately, send you out in a pair of shoes that's really going to fix it, because probably the problem is more in your foot. And so,
right,
when the people come in and they're like, the shoe, I just want you to sell me a shoe. And we're like, well, we've got this thing that you can do in terms of exercises. That's not necessarily I don't know, like that, right? It's that much broader, more impactful discussion, but not everybody's in a place where they want to take that on, I guess. They want to buy the fix and not necessarily do the work. And they're like, wow, what? Like, what are you talking about?
And I want it now.
Yeah, totally. Right. And even your product, going through the running Rewired book, like it's awesome. You have so many plans and so many photos here. You make it so accessible. But how many people will open it up and just be like, oh, like I'm busy enough in life. How am I going to get to chapter, whatever, and how? And so here you've really distilled it. Okay, so I've given you all the pictures here, and if you're still not going to do the work, all right, I'm going to give you the Mobo Board. And I'm not even saying you need to spend 5 sessions a week. You're saying in the other ones are like, no, do it 5-6 minutes at a time, maybe 2 or 3 days a week if you can. Like we're not asking much time here.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny. I actually teach a motor behavior course at OSU, and like we're talking to our students right now. Like, what's it take to make a difference? I'm like, well, practice. I'm like, okay, yes, it does, but you know what? You have to do the right technique with your practice. Just like doing volume of things, i.e., running, doesn't make you a faster runner, right? If everyone listens to the show, like you get specific improvements when you do specific things, right? If you just run long, you're not going to get faster. Like you train different energy systems, right? You do VO2 work, you do lactate work. It's like it's given. Everybody should understand those terms. Listen to this podcast. Well, guess what? Same thing for your biomechanics work, right? You got to train the chassis as well as the engine. And if you show up wobbly through some link in your chain, you're going to fall apart. So, this is not in my mind, this is not something else you have to do as a runner. This is part of what you signed up for when you registered for a race. So, you need to take care of your body. And I know we live in this, we joke about the now world and people want this instantly, but you got to put this in. It doesn't take that much time. It really doesn't. I get it takes time to accept the fact we're going to have to start a new plan to add things in, but most of you have been doing pre-run stretches anyway for 10 minutes for 20 years. That's garbage. Stop. Do things, do something constructive, that's going to teach you to own the range of motion. So take that same 10, 15 minutes, let's do something different, right? And put that in before you run, right? It's real simple and get a lot of bang for your buck. So, I've got tools around Rewired and Anatomy for Runners. If you look at the Mobo Board website, there's a whole list of website exercises you can do on there as well, with videos in every single one of them. But, I try to make things accessible and actionable so that you can put them into practice. And, it can be real simple, right? It can be as simple as following a very rigid plan. For those of you who are type A people and want that, I've got that all broken down and running Rewired. Those of you who kind of want things to kind of rotate through, go to the Mobo website, look at the exercise tab and say, okay, the foot six pack, I'm working these for a little bit to get my foot developed. Let's kind of get you back to your baseline, teach you coordination. But then everything after that, with the exception of the rehab section, is all like multi-joint exercises. Okay, well, guess what? Today I'm going to work on single leg deadlift, star squats, and tippy birds, right? Like, done. Keep it simple. Next time you do something, next day you have 8 minutes. Pick 2 or 3 more different exercises, right? Like, the more different things you do, the more you get nervous system exposed to different stimuli. And then the more you repeat it, the more consistent you get and the more you actually start to make changes. And so, all these things kind of pull together to make you a better person. That's what we're trying to do. Is really, help you move better, run better, again, maintain form and not get as tired and broken down. And that's the whole kind of package thing.
Dude, you've got, there's so many things that you've said here. And I'm like, man, like, I really want to jump into that tangent and I want to go down that rabbit hole with you. There was, so in some of the sessions this year in these Trails Collective Lives, I was doing some of my root sessions and those that were friends along the way. And one of them was Jeff Browning, which you would have overlapped with in Bend. And we were on chatting. I think we chatted for maybe like 3 hours, like on this Trails Collective Live session. We just dug in, kind of Rogan style in terms of going long. And then even after we ended the live episode, Jenny hopped on and we caught up for a little while longer or whatever. And so with you, I'm like, man, I wish we had the base and the time to dig into all these. One of the things you just said, like, stop doing that. Like, that's just crap. Like, I would love to say, give me the top 5 things that would be, let's just like debunk these now. And let's go through like each point. Here's maybe why you were doing it in the past. Here's why they don't really make sense. Here's the research. And so, and to respect your time, because I know you got a ton on your plate and there's a lot of people like me that are asking for your time. Down the line, if you have the time or the inclination for another session, I would love to dig into a little bit more in injuries. I would love to debunk maybe some of those myths from your perspective, if we want to call them that, or not even necessarily myths, but the things that maybe we're still doing that now the science says maybe we really shouldn't be doing those, and to dig in. So
I'd love to.
Maybe yeah, cool. Well, I'll come back at you for the moment, though. I won't hold you any longer. For those who want to find the Mobo board, go check it out online. It's a brilliant tool. I don't know how simpler he could make it for you, help him help you to a certain extent. You can get it here at the Finger Lakes Running Company, and we will try to educate more people on it. Jay, I thank you for all of your work over the years. I've tuned in what I've caught. I've been inspired by. I've tried to apply it. So thanks for doing what you do. I know it's helped a ton of people, and to your point, not just elite. So we're all grateful.
We're all just trying to help. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah,
It was great
totally.
chat, and thanks for all you do as well.
All right. Thanks, man. All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Yeah. So for the Trails Collective audience, thank you so much for tuning into this week's round of Trails Collective Live. I really enjoyed the time catching up with Mort and Sher in the beginning, and I've wanted for so long to be able to dig in further with Jay, truly one of the preeminent sports physical therapists out there. I know at some point I'm going to find myself back in Oregon, and I will try to reach out for a checkout availability on the calendar as I'm planning that vacation adventure. I've got any number of things torn in my body at the moment for connective tissue. And so really I need to do the work as well. Thank you for tuning in. If you're finding it after the fact, thank you. Thank you for liking the channels. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for supporting those who we connect with, such as Jay and the Mobo board. And yeah, stay tuned. We're still figuring out what the calendar ahead is. It's looking like maybe in the month of May, we'll focus on some topics with women in trail and ultra and sport, and maybe some of the differential there. And we'll get into another topic I'd like to with other PTs focused on injuries and running injuries. But it's been fun so far. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being with us. And I will catch you on the next round. Till then, see ya.